And lay out America and how the history of America is far different from what we're taught in school.
Well, the convolution of history is one of the most insidious plans of the controllers of society. If they can hide from us the true origins of certain issues, such as the naming and the true identity of America, then they can keep us from seeing the implications of the things that are unfolding right before our eyes. In fact, much of history, as many people know, has been purposely distorted so that we would have a favorable view of certain institutions than they deserve. And this falls right into those lines. This is, by the way, as Steve mentioned, the basis of what we're talking about this evening is found in Steve's book, True Legends. And Steve breaks it down a lot better than I ever could in a 10-minute analysis. So I encourage everybody who's interested to go and get True Legends to follow up with the information that we're going to give tonight, because he really finishes, he really attacks every angle of this stuff. So basically, in public school, we're all taught, I was taught and everybody else is taught, that America derived its name from the Italian cartographer and explorer Amerigo Vespucci, which is a fallacy. And I myself never really gave that a second thought when I was in high school, for example, because it seemed such a trivial matter, the origin of the name of America. But as you're going to see tonight, for those of you who are not already familiar with this subject matter, there's some pretty interesting things, and that's an understatement, connected to this fallacy and connected to the truth behind the name of America. So Amerigo Vespucci, basically they say that it was adapted in America, the name America, by the way, referring to the whole continent of America, not just North or Central or South America, the whole continent, was derived from the Latin version of his name. So they tell us in school, which is Americus. But the reason why the people believe, that historians believe that America derived its name from Amerigo Vespucci is because of a map that was produced in 1507, which is called Waldseemüller's World Map. The Latin name of the map is Universalis Cosmographia, and it was drafted by German cartographers Martin Waldseemüller and Matthias Ringman. And in this map, they were the first ones to actually give a name to the continent of America, to the New World, and obviously they called it America. So because of that, historians have just taken for granted that America was named after Amerigo Vespucci, which, of course, has been an issue of conflict. This is a popular conflict, by the way. You don't hear about it in school, but the History Channel has dealt with this and different programs and internet sites, that Amerigo Vespucci would have never named the continent after Amerigo Vespucci using his first name. We can just start right there. That alone pretty much wipes out the foundations of America being named after this man. They would have named it, if anything, they would have named it after his last name. That's always the case. And cartographers, especially cartographers and historians, should know better than to think that America would be named after the first name of Vespucci rather than his last name. But beyond that, basically the Americas, obviously before the Europeans in the pre-Columbian times visited America, the natives had a name for their land. The land was not nameless. And as you explore it, as you read True Legends and as you look into the history, you find that it was almost a universal name that not only Indians or natives from one group of the continent called their land, but it was something that was ubiquitous across the continent, because the Incas called their land Amaruca, and the natives in Central America called their land Amaracapana. or Amarica for short. And we might be botching these names, by the way, tonight, because I don't have any idea how they actually pronounce this. I know that the Inca term Amaruca is correct because I lived in Peru and I'm familiar with the name Amaru, such as in Tupac Amaru. So basically, the Indians called their land Amaracapana, Amarica, or Amaruca, based on which tribe they were from, which part of the Americas they were from, which obviously is far better proof that America was named after them rather than after Vespucci. It makes a lot more sense that we would adapt the same name that they were already using, and of course we took that name and we made an adaptation to that name that is easier for European tongues, America. So basically, the term Amaruca. Let's deal with the term Amaruca, because Amaruca was an Incan term. The word Amaru means serpent, and it specifically references the plumed serpent or the feathered serpent. So it is a specific reference to the feathered serpent, and we know that because the Incans had in the traditions of the Incans, the Amaru was a fabled serpent. It was also worshipped as a deity, and it ties in, as we'll see later, to Viracocha and the other deities of the Americas, of the other plumed serpent deities of the Americas. So Amaru was a legendary beast, a flying dragon to the Incas. The word Ka means land of. So Amaruca means land of, the flying serpent, the feathered serpent, or alternatively, the plumed serpent, land of the plumed serpent. We know that this is the case for many reasons, but for one reason in particular, there's a very famous character in Peruvian history. His name is Tupac Amaru. Tupac Amaru was the last ruler in the bloodline of the Inca emperors. And he led the final insurrection against the Spaniards in Peru from the final stronghold of the Incas in Vilcabamba. And so he's a very famous figure, which incidentally the Incas were slaughtered. That was the last stand of the Incas, and the Inca Empire was brought to ruin once and for all in Vilcabamba with Tupac Amaru, and he was beheaded. So Tupac's name, which is again laid out in True Legends, Tupac means one who glows or one who shines, and again Amaru means the plumed serpent or serpent. So basically, Tupac Amaru means the shining plumed serpent. So that's how we derive the meaning of the plumed serpent. But besides that, we also find in the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall, who of course was a famous Masonic scholar, he was quoting in the Secret Teachings of All Ages, he was quoting Theosophist author James Morgan Price when he said, "The children of the sun adore the plumed serpent, who is the messenger of the sun." By the way, children of the sun refers to the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, and all those Mesoamerican and South American cultures that worship the sun. He was the god Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Gucumatz in Quiche, and in Peru he was called Amaru. From the latter name comes our word America. Amaruca is literally translated land of the plumed serpent. So there we have some bolstering proof to the fact that the word Amaruca, or alternatively Amarica or Amaracapana, means land of the plumed or feathered serpent. Steve?
The reason this is critical is because, again, when you see, we'll get into Quetzalcoatl, some people pronounce him Quetzalcoatl, the point being that in early history, and I'm talking pre-Columbian, which simply means prior to Columbus, the constant human sacrifice, the constant desire for blood, the constant cannibalistic sacrifice is something that mainstream history didn't want to ever deal with. Doug, Joe, Tim. They wanted to kind of avoid it. They also, for years, wouldn't admit that many of the Indians in the desert southwest, the Native Americans, practiced cannibalism. The reason the Anasazi in the Four Corners region of the United States lived under the cliffs in cliff dwellings in very, very unusual circumstances is because they wanted to be able to live in their culture and not get eaten. They never wanted to be shish kebab on the run. There are so many Native American legends, and this is, Doug and Joe, so critical now, because as we come into the time that Jesus spoke about, that men's hearts would fail them for fear of looking upon the earth, this is why it's so critical to understand Genesis chapter 6. It's also important to understand that when God destroyed the prior creation that was on earth during Noah's time, even according to Jeremiah, the 4th chapter, prior to that, in what's called the dateless past, we had the situation where there was a judgment upon the and this is critical, pre-Adamic world. Now, mainstream Christianity paints itself into a corner because they only accept 6,000 years of the creation, and based on Bishop Ussher and others' timetables, and I'm sure that you learned that, Doug, when you went to school. But the point being is that we're at a time now where if you will, the short-sightedness and the fear of letting people know the truth is coming to an end. And it's critical because, again, the thing we see in the Word of God over and over and over, Joel chapter 3, I think verse 9 and 12, talks about us being pressed from the mighty ones coming down from above, fallen angels, and the mighty ones coming up from below, the Rephaim, in essence, the resurrection of the giants, or the Rapha, which are the Hebrew word for the dead. The point being is we're going to get sandwiched between both heaven, fallen angels of heaven, hell, and the intervention of a supernatural God redeeming us. I get a lot of flack, you guys, for a lot of years. And I even still today get people say, my pastor says that's not important. Well, I tell them that's because, number one, he doesn't know the truth. Number two, he's afraid of the truth. And number three, he doesn't know how to deal with the truth. So what we're trying to do tonight is give people a general understanding of why the Smithsonian basically has controlled the flow of relics, artifacts, manuscripts, some of the most out-of-place artifacts, which are called uparts, and why there's been a total lockdown under the United States control of all of that which points to fallen angels, that points to prior fallen angel technology. Listen, for a number of years, 3 or 4 years, I hung out with some very smart people, very smart, what I call the mighty men and women of valor. And continually, my mind was blown when I understood the true history of America. Now, why this is critical is this. I want everybody to know this. It doesn't matter what Tim Alberino knows or Steve Quayle knows. It's what God has given us to research. He's put it in our hearts to bring this stuff forward, but it's always, always subservient to the Word of God. I think, Doug, you've heard me say that over the years you and I have done talk radio together. But in order that the veil might be torn literally off the eyes of God's people, see, this is what the Luciferians are doing right now. It doesn't matter if it's the Georgia Guidestones. It doesn't matter if it's the Satanic High Mass or Black Mass in Oklahoma City. It doesn't matter if it was the Anubis statue going throughout the land and the crystal skulls. Ladies and gentlemen, what you saw in all of those instances was the reestablishment of basically the pagan, and I mean that, the pagan reclaiming the land that the Christians stole from them. Most people don't understand this, that the reason the Aztecs, the Incans, and the Mayans fell is they had prophetic understanding of those who would come in their future. And for instance, it's interesting, this is one of the things I quote in my book, and I think it's critical. This is on page 231, is the prophecy. I'll read it and then I'll talk about it, and Tim, you're free to interject. And I'm reading, quote unquote, from Garcilaso de Inca de la Vega, and it's his book. He said, but the most interesting of American legends connected with the discovery is that in which the prophecy of the Maya priest Shilan Balam is described. Father Lozana, a venerable Spanish author, records a prophecy which he states was very well known throughout the Yucatan, as does Villaguerte, who quotes it. And here's the prophecy. At the end of the 13th age, when Itza, which Chichen Itza gets its name from, is at the height of its power, as also the city called Tanca, the signal of God will appear on the heights, and the cross with which the world was enlightened will be manifested. There will be variants of men's will in future times when the signal shall be brought. Receive your barbarous, bearded guests from the cast, who bring the signal of God, who comes to us in mercy and pity. The time of our life is coming. Thus, they write, the ships, the Christian crosses, beards, and white skin were all predicted with the arrival of the Europeans to Central America. Now, having said that, as I've researched Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, all of, quote, the gods, in essence, every time they're portrayed, you're going to love this, as bipedal reptilians. In other words, totally giant reptilians. Now, when we go to some of the oldest known artifacts in history, everybody remarks, why does this thing look like an alien? Why does this thing look like a snake that walks on two legs? Why are the eyes slanted? Why is the snake cult the oldest cult in the world? The snake cult and the sun cult go hand in hand. Tim, why don't you go ahead and just comment on the snake cult? Because when we go to the Serpent Mound in the Midwest, and as Henry Gruber has said on this show a couple times, it almost cost him his life when he tried to take dominion over the principalities and powers in that area without God telling him to and without having the prayer backup. And Henry is a mighty man of God. He tells his own story. But, Tim, let's just deal with the snake cult, because you can't get away from serpents in either the Aztec, Incan, Mayan religion or into the desert Southwest and all the way through the Americas. When I say the Americas, I mean North America, Latin America, and South America. Go ahead.
Well, the cult of the sun and the serpent is, as Steve said, the oldest religion on the planet. And this is not my opinion or Steve's opinion. This is fact. The famous occultists, including Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and Manly P. Hall and Albert Pike, and I'm not venerating these people, by the way, but these are the people who are supposed to be experts in the occult and have written extensively on the occult and have studied extensively the occult and were completely deceived. But anyway, they attest to the fact that the worship of the snake and of the serpent is, in fact, the oldest religion on the planet. In fact, in Blavatsky's book, The Secret Doctrine, she makes the following, she says the following. Now listen to this. Listen to this closely, because this is very interesting what she says. The tradition of the dragon and the sun is echoed in every part of the world, both in its civilized and semi-savage regions. It took rise in the whisperings about secret initiations among the profane. By the way, we're all the profane. And was established universally through the once universal heliolatrous religion. There was a time when the four parts of the world were covered with a temple sacred to the sun and the dragon. But the cult is now preserved mostly in China and Buddhist countries. We find A, the priests assuming the name of the gods they serve. B, the dragons held throughout all antiquity as the symbols of immortality and wisdom, of secret knowledge and eternity. And C, the hierophants of Egypt, of Babylon and India, or the adepts or the initiated, styling themselves generally the sons of the dragon and serpents. So basically, we're dealing with something here that this isn't a trivial matter. This isn't just about that the name of America is misunderstood, that or maybe that there's some minor conspiracy surrounding the naming of America. No, this points to something so deep. This points to something so, complex, that you have to go really, really, really deep into the occult to start to understand. And I don't mean go into the occult in terms of giving yourself over to the occult, in terms of understanding the symbolism, in terms of understanding where all of this is going, in terms of understanding the Luciferian doctrine, to really grasp the implications of what this means for the future of the United States of America. Now, the ancients living in the great civilizations of antiquity were not stupid people. That's another fallacy that we're taught in school. We're taught that the ancients were brutes, that they were ignorant. That's not true. The ancients knew many things that we're just learning right now, especially when it comes to astrology and when it comes to mapping the stars and different mathematical calculations, things that they could not have possibly known from a earthly standpoint. In other words, things that we're only finding out because we're actually going out into space and taking the calculations ourselves and mapping these things ourselves and taking a look at the different planets. We're realizing that the ancients, the more we do this, the more we're realizing that the ancients had some very, very intense, advanced knowledge of the cosmos. And this goes back to the worship of the sun and the dragon. Again, the oldest religion in the world. The ancients were not literally worshiping the sun. Some of the more ignorant peoples did literally worship the sun, but the advanced societies were never actually worshiping the sun itself, or never actually worshiping a snake itself. They were never actually worshiping just the snake, the reptile. They were always worshiping the deity that those things symbolize. And obviously, most people have already put the pieces together with that one. It's Lucifer. Lucifer is the ultimate, Lucifer is what these symbols point to, and that's unequivocal. And the reason why the sun and the serpent, which are oftentimes portrayed together, they're oftentimes depicted together in ancient symbology, or in the ancient symbolism of for example, the Egyptians and the Sumerians. One of the famous symbols is the snake encircling the sun, eating its own tail. And the reason why that is because they basically essentially represent the same thing. The sun represents, the physical sun represents, obviously, let me say it this way, just as the physical sun enlightens the earth and makes life possible on the earth, the spiritual serpent enlightens mankind and gives him eternal life, or guides him into eternal life. This is according to the occult. Just as the sun rises and sets anew, so the serpent sheds its skin anew. This is an allegory of resurrection. So the serpent and the sun signify, above all else, enlightenment and apotheosis, knowledge and eternal life, which is obviously a function of the tree of knowledge of good, of the knowledge of good and evil, and the fall. This brings us to Genesis, the book of Genesis, chapter 3. Then the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, the fruit of the tree of knowledge, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her and ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened. So what we're talking about is the literal worship, the literal veneration of Lucifer, and the knowledge that he gives, the enlightenment that he gives. See, because in the occult world, the story of the fall of man is reversed. It's inverted. So, in other words, Satan wasn't ensnaring Adam and Eve with a lie that would lead to the curse of sin and death, and ultimately to all the problems that humanity would face as a result. But to the occult, Satan was enlightening Adam and Eve, that he was giving them secret knowledge, and he was breaking the bonds of, breaking the bonds of Adonai, and they refer to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as Adonai, that Satan was that Adonai was an evil, oppressive deity, and Satan was the giver of knowledge, freedom. He was the one who could lead men into eternal life. Obviously, this is an affront to the gospel, and it is Satan's taking the gospel and he's turning it upside down and basically referencing himself as Christ, because we know that Jesus says in John chapter 11, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. And then again in John 8, he says, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. So these are the attributes that Satan claims for himself. He claims to be the light of the world. He literally claims to be, and his adepts and his initiates claim that he is the giver of life and the enlightener of mankind, when obviously that couldn't be further from the truth. So going back to the worship of the sun and the serpent, that's what it symbolizes. There's a famous quote by Albert Pike, who was the sovereign grand commander of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, in his book Morals and Dogma, where he says, Lucifer, the light bearer, strange and mysterious name to give to the spirit of darkness. Lucifer, the son of the morning. Is it he who bears the light, and with his splendors intolerable, blinds feeble, sensual, or selfish souls? Doubt it not. For traditions are full of divine revelations and inspirations from Lucifer, and inspiration is not of one age, nor of one creed. And it's essentially what he's saying is inspiration and enlightenment come not from one age or one creed, but from one entity. And that entity, Satan, is represented in the ancient world by the sun and the serpent. And also his servants, or the initiates as they call themselves, are represented by the serpent. They actually call themselves the sons of the dragon, or the sons of the serpent god. And these initiates, by the way, we can get into this later, Steve, these initiates, by the way, I don't believe are fully human. Steve made an allusion to the plumed serpent entities sometimes having the appearance of what could be described as serpent humanoid creatures, oftentimes giant serpent humanoid creatures. And so I believe that there actually exist emissaries of the Luciferian doctrine that are not human, that visit cultures and that lead people astray, lead them into darkness, lead them into rebellion against God. Of course, the ancient astronauts believed that those were the Pleiadians, or those were the Nordic races, or the gray aliens, or what have you, that came and they bestowed technology and enlightenment on the civilizations, the primeval civilizations of the earth. Again, that couldn't be further from the truth. There were no good intentions. There are never good intentions when enlightenment, when the tree of knowledge, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is taught and planted and abounds in a society. And we tend to, even those of us who live in the United States, who live in the civilized world, we tend to really, in a sense, worship knowledge. And a lot of people don't realize that the worship of knowledge is actually Luciferian, because the knowledge that trumps all other knowledge, the knowledge that we have that even the angels don't understand, the Bible says, is the knowledge of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and is the intimate relationship with Jesus. That's the true knowledge. That's the knowledge. That's the true light, obviously. So basically most people realize that the name Lucifer is a name that was derived from the Latin Vulgate, from the words lux, meaning light, and ferre, which means to bear. So light bearer. He's also called son of the morning or morning star, which is interesting, very interesting when dealing with Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, and Viracocha, who were all the plumed serpent gods of the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca, because all of the plumed serpent gods, and there are others, by the way, with the lesser indigenous groups who represent the same person, but those are the three major ones, Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha, all of those entities are directly associated with the morning star, with the star of the dawn, literally the planet Venus, because that's what the morning star is. And in Isaiah 14, verse 12, we have an allusion to Satan, to Lucifer being associated with the star, with the planet Venus. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, which can also be translated morning star, which is the planet Venus, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. And there's something here that I think people miss. It says Lucifer weakens the nations. I think a lot of people interpret that, and they think that what that implies is that Satan, his involvement, Lucifer's involvement in a society, causes that society to basically be degraded in terms of maybe technology, politically, or militarily, which really is not true. It's really quite the opposite. When the term weaken the nations does not imply that Lucifer caused the great civilizations of the world to be weak militarily, politically, or technologically, but rather morally. And this is important. Morally. That's how he weakens the nations. And I want everybody to start connecting the dots here with Amaduka, America, the land we live in. He weakens them morally, leading them into gross sin and rebellion against God through the shedding of blood, sexual depravity, and idolatry. So, but obviously in the traditions of the occult, he's the great enlightener. He enlightens these cultures. He causes them to prosper, and basically every time Lucifer is involved directly in a nation, what you end up having is you have the initiates, the sons of the dragon, who end up ruling over the nation from behind the scenes. We have different names for those people. We call them Luciferians. We call them the Illuminati. We call them the global elite. But that's who they are. So there's a lot of connections here, especially when you talk about the plumed serpent, the subject matter of tonight's broadcast. So the plumed serpent, to recap this, the plumed serpent is associated with the sun, and I'll get to that in a minute, why he's associated with the sun, besides the fact that it's a Luciferian cult, and directly associated with the planet Venus, which the Bible associates with Lucifer. So obviously there's a direct connection to the Luciferian cult and the civilizations and the pagan traditions of the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca. So but it gets really interesting when you begin to break this down and you begin to compare the different traditions of those civilizations concerning these plumed serpent gods. You start to get the sense that either this is the same person, that Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, and Viracocha are the same guy, or it's coming from the same group of people or the same race of entities. Because there are so many similarities. Again, the depiction of those three gods is most often the plumed serpent, literally a dragon with a plumed mane or a feathered mane. But there are two other depictions, and Steve again mentioned one of them. The giant Draco, or the giant reptilian being, is another one. But there's a third, which I find the most provocative. And again, this goes for all three of those entities: Kukulkan of the Maya, Quetzalcoatl of the Aztec, and Viracocha, and alternatively Amaru of the Inca. They all had a human form. They all had a human form. And their human form was not native. It wasn't indigenous. It wasn't brown skin and dark eyes and black hair, as is the norm. Their human form was just the opposite. They were described as being tall. They were described as being white-skinned or Caucasian-skinned with golden beards or blonde hair and beards, or golden hair and beards, and blue or green eyes. So obviously this is not the norm for the civilizations with which they were involved. And when it says tall, these guys were pretty tall. Now, in some cases, there are stories that tell, legends that tell, or that talk about Viracocha, for example, as being the size of an average man. But as we all know, the legends of the natives are very convoluted and contradictory. Sometimes he's tall, sometimes he's normal size. Sometimes it's blue eyes, sometimes it's green eyes, sometimes it's blonde hair, sometimes it's golden hair. So, but the fact is that they had a human form, and it looked like basically the archetypical portrayal of Jesus Christ, which I find very interesting. They were not Jesus Christ. They may have, now follow this line of thought, Steve, for a minute, and Joe and Doug. They may have appeared to the Incas, to the Mayas, and to the Aztecs in that form because they knew that, just as Steve read that, those verses from, I forget what the source was, Steve, but where it basically prophesies that bearded men were coming bearing the cross. It's interesting to note that these plumed serpent god-men portrayed themselves in the very imagery that they must have known was coming to the New World. Obviously, there was deception going on. So they were laying the foundation for deception to turn people away from Jesus or confuse people about Jesus right from the beginning. So that was surely part of the strategy of these guys adopting this human form, which was very, as I said, very archetypical of Christ. Of the paintings, the very paintings and imagery that the conquistadores were carrying with them of Christ. In fact, it's said of Quetzalcoatl that, in some of the legends, that he wore a black gown with the figures of crosses at the bottom, which is very reminiscent, obviously, of the apparel of the clergymen of the Catholic Church. So it's very interesting to see that somebody was preempting the coming of the gospel. And I'm not saying the arrival of the gospel. I'm not saying that the Spaniards, by the way, that the conquistadores were coming as good representations of the gospel. By the way, I don't think anybody would argue that case. But nonetheless, the gospel did come. And the Bibles were dispersed, and the natives were told about the death, burial, and resurrection of the Son of God. So, again, recapping that whole idea is obviously, in my opinion, the devil was preempting the coming of the gospel in this form. But I don't think that that's the only reason why they adopted this form of these bearded tall white men with blue or green eyes. It's interesting to note that, there's allusions to this in some of the stories and true legends, that it wasn't just the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca that talked about white bearded godmen with blue eyes. This was a common theme throughout many different tribes around the Americas, and obviously all over the world. And an interesting anecdote in the legends is that these guys, these bearded gods, are oftentimes depicted as riding on craft, on saucer craft, or in disc-shaped craft. Obviously, we think of UFOs or flying saucers. So we've got these entities, these plumed serpent entities, Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, and Amaru, so I'll get to Amaru Mudu in a minute, which are portraying themselves, or at least are being represented by the imagery of the dragon or the serpent, the plumed serpent, also by large reptilian entities, and by these tall, Caucasian, bearded men with blue and green eyes. It's very, very interesting. Now, it gets even more interesting. Every single one of those deities is associated with the Great Flood, and some of them giants. Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan actually claim to have come from a land that was destroyed by a flood. And they were bearing technology and knowledge from that land. Viracocha is the creator god of the Incas. They claim that he created the giants and then destroyed them because they were evil with a flood. So it gets kind of convoluted with Viracocha. However, there is a character that not many people know about in the Inca legend. His name is Amaru Muru. Amaru Muru was the first priest king of the Incas. And just as Quetzalcoatl, just as Kukulkan, just as Viracocha, was credited with founding his civilization. So all of these plumed serpent godmen were credited. They were the ones that were credited with actually founding their civilizations. Now, Amaru Muru is very interesting because Amaru Muru arrived to the land of the Incas, basically Peru and Bolivia. He arrived to that land through a stargate. And this is literally what the legend says. They don't call it a stargate. They call it the gateway of the gods, or a portal, which some people believe is actually the structure that is called Amaru Muru in Peru, which is supposed to be the location that Amaru Muru came into the land of the Incas, into Peru from the land of the gods, which, by the way, he said was destroyed in a flood. And this gateway, by the way, people can look this up. It's called the Stargate or the Gateway of Amaru Muru. Sometimes people pronounce it Aramu Muru, but I think the proper word for it is Amaru Muru. And the Gateway of Amaru Muru.
Hey, Tim. Yeah, Tim, spell it for the
Yes.
people, because, again, with your accent pronouncing it, those of us who aren't Spanish-speaking, spell it out so they can look at it, because we're talking about even a location now. I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's important that people understand this, where even people today absolutely will testify in a trembling manner that they're still seeing entities coming through the gates. And when in the next hour we want to deal with stargates, because it's critical that people understand this, because one of the questions that get answered, and again, forgive me, but please spell Amaru Maru so people know.
Amaru Muru is spelled A-M-A-R-U, Amaru, and then the second word is Muru, M-U-R-U. There's variations of the spelling, but you'll pull it up. People will pull it up right away. If they type in Amaru, A-M-A-R-U, they're going to get right away some images popping up in their search engine of what appears to be a doorway carved into stone. And people need to look at this, because Steve talks a lot about stargates, and a lot of people ridicule him for talking about stargates, that such a thing even exists. But let me tell you something. There are the people living around this, what is alleged to be a stargate, the very one that Amaru Muru, the priest king of the Incas, came through. The people living around, the villagers living around this site. By the way, it's also called Hayamarca. That's another term, but I don't want to confuse people. You'll find it if you type in Amaru Muru. The villagers living around this megalith actually claim, the elders of the village and the older women, some of whom, by the way, are well over 100. And when I say that, the people of the Andean communities, some of them live 115 years. It's not unheard of for some of them even to live longer. But they hold the tradition. No, I shouldn't say that. Some of them claim, and listen, there is the testimony of these villagers on the internet, on YouTube. And it's not hearsay. They're giving the testimony in Quechuan and Spanish and talking about how they have actually seen this doorway, this stargate open, and entities coming in and out, even giants. So that obviously that correlates and backs up a lot of the stuff that Steve, you've been saying for years. And this is, and we're not talking about, these aren't testimonies from 30, 40, 50 years ago. These are testimonies from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even sooner. because there's various ones. And again, you can find them on the internet, and people will say, well, it's probably hearsay. No, it's not. It's the actual villagers giving testimony about what they've seen. And there's a legend around by the villagers there, and I don't have the name of the village up in front of me here, but it's on the border of Bolivia and Peru. It's right around the Tiwanaku area where all those megaliths are on the bank of actually it's on the Peruvian side, and it's near the Lake Titicaca. It just came to mind. So
right, and Tim,
anyway,
I want to make a comment really quick on Lake Titicaca, because as you were speaking, that's where I went to. What I think people need to understand is that Lake Titicaca is just sub 13,000 feet up in elevation, highest lake. The astonishing thing about this are the legends and the sightings and the supernatural events taking place. As a matter of fact, this lake is pretty huge. It's 3,000, it's 118 miles long, and it's about, the total area, I think, is 21,726 square miles. The cities are Puno and Copacabana. Copacabana, obviously, is Puno. And the thing that's interesting is the Tiwanaku, and ladies and gentlemen, this is where it gets really interesting. Literally means a city of Enoch, just like Tenochtitlan, Tenochitlan. So what we're talking about this stuff, here's the reason why. When Jesus said, and this is fascinating, because Tom Horn, I believe, was God gave him the key to basically, at the time he wrote about stargates, and then I came online almost, maybe a month after that, the most prominent and amazing thing to me is that I have given to Tim, I have given it to Tom Horn and others, the entire U.S. military's dealing with stargates in the Americas. Now, for those of you who have been watching, now this is critical because this is what's going to tie this in. We'll probably get to this in the third hour. But the deep underground military bases were built in known areas of stargates. They're usually symbolized like a spiral or a sun, but they're always symbolized as to the location of where they are located. Concurrent with the deep underground military bases are tunnel systems that South America is riddled with. There are those who claim that I've talked to in the military that the whole world is linked by either some of the tunnels now have been flooded due to sea rise, which is no problem for submarines, but we're talking about a very ancient time. I'm talking prior to the creation of Adam and Eve. The point that people have got to understand is this. The reason there's conflict in the universe is God did something so amazing, so wonderful in the first chapter of Genesis, first couple chapters of Genesis. I get bits and pieces. Tim gets bits and pieces. Other authors, investigators get bits and pieces. But there were angelic civilizations. The Sumerian Table of Kings goes back almost 250,000 years, with some of the kings ruling 40,000 years. But they were always giants. And one of the things that's important to understand is that when Jesus himself said his church is going to be built on faith, okay, and that faith, not just on Peter, basically Jesus says, Peter, you are a small stone, but upon this rock, the just shall live by faith, I will build my church. The church means the called out ones, the word ecclesia or ecclesia. Now, fast forward to all this stuff. Whenever the Spanish conquistadors, whenever the different people that chronicled the lives of all of the great explorers, both English, Spanish, and Portuguese, the common thread in all of them is they ran into giants, okay? And Tim, I want to go here because it's critical to go back to Peru and Bolivia and getting into Paracas, etc. In 1539, this is one of the most astonishing things I know of. It's on page 232 of my book. De Soto discovered tribes of giants in present-day Florida. Now listen to this. Most people that live in Tuscaloosa, Alabama wouldn't know that the tribe was led by a giant named Tuscaloosa along with his son. In other words, the city of Tuscaloosa is named after a giant. And that city was built upon a mound of heavily fortified, if you will, tunnels, chambers, etc. Now, the Spanish tried to bully Tuscaloosa into giving them supplies, as in slave labor and women, causing a falling out with the Native Americans, which eventually led to the battle of burning of their villages. But in 1541, 2 years later, as he got out of Florida, he and his men found more giants. He's standing the average guy was 7 feet. They chronicle 9 to 12 feet. Now, why is this important? Well, the Spaniards called these people, and if I'm pronouncing this right, Tim, correct me, please, ladies and gentlemen. I don't mean to be offensive, but I don't pronounce Spanish names. But Los Indios Gigantes are the giant Indians. Is that pretty good? Los Indios Gigantes.
That's right.
Okay, and refer to the chief priest of the tribe,
right.
yeah, as the great sons. Okay. And this is what's interesting, because I'm not familiar with the Ocmulgee National Monument or the Etowah, E-T-O-W-A-H mounds, the historic landmark, but the bottom line is they back up the stories of the giants in the region. Here's what's interesting. When God absolutely spoke to the children of Israel to go in and dispossess the land of the giants, that's what you're reading in Numbers when it says the land it devours its inhabitants. And when the spies say we were as grasshoppers in their sight, these guys fled to every point on the globe. The ones that were fallen angels were able to go off planet. If you look at the book of Obadiah, one of the most amazing prophetic statements in one sentence, pretty much one sentence, and I'm paraphrasing this, though you set your nest amongst the stars, yet will I bring ye down. God speaking. The idea that fallen angels who knew this stuff was coming, the book of Enoch goes into great detail, and I deal with that in True Legends. I want to share something, Tim. I'm so grateful that God has given you the mantle that He's given to you. And what, ladies and gentlemen, it's important to understand is that when we see these things coming to pass, when we hear about stargates opening, when we hear about all of the stories associated with them, when I get from Native Americans all throughout the United States, all the weird stuff going on, when you see all of the things that once were relegated to mythology and legends now, people having to deal with incubus, succubus. Even in the days of Rome, there were fossilized satyrs, half man, half goat. The point being is when you track it all down, when you see Satan's throne in Pergamos, and you see the giant frieze or the carving into the face of stone, F-R-I-E-Z-E, and you see that the battle between heaven and earth and the attendant entities is so strong that you cannot deny it. The idea of covering it up was this. The word occult means to hide or to occlude, meaning to keep it from the normal vision. That's why Tim made the point. Basically, to the occultists, the illuminists, the globalists, those who are into secret ceremonies and initiation, they believe their salvation comes through gnosis, and gnosis is knowledge. And so with that knowledge that they're going to be saved by the knowledge of good and evil, not by the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's the conflict right now. And unfortunately, Christians, and this is my heart's desire, must understand that God is doing a mighty work, and He's doing such an amazing work because God's not afraid of the truth. You know, Tim, I have a statement. We better go to a break, Doug. I think we're right at the top of the hour, but I have a statement. God's not afraid of truth. Therefore, I find it interesting that His kids are.